You'll learn about various components and Visual Studio solutions throughout this entire set of C# courses as a need arises for them. But you can see the project structure here within Solution Explorer, and I'll go ahead and pin that open so it stays open. Now, it's important to understand that Solution Explorer shows a view into components that make up the project, listing both physical disk files as well as features contained within other various files. In other words, Solution Explorer is not a view into disk files alone. So it'll be a lot easier for you to understand what Solution Explorer is all about by keeping that point in mind. Now, the project structure of this console application contains elements that you'll find in almost all .NET project types. The first is this Properties folder. This contains an assemblyinfo.cs code file. A .NET assembly is the usual result of compiling code, and the CLR makes use of metadata that identifies characteristics of the code, such as your company name, copyright information, and version numbers. So if I double-click on that to open it, now it's open within the code window there. I'll hide that for the time being. And you can see various attributes. I know these are attributes because they have square brackets. And specifically, they're attributes of the assembly that is going to be generated by this code, as indicated by the keyword there. So assembly and colon. And then it has various attributes, and then it passes in a string to include the value of that attribute. Okay, so you can see there's an assembly title that was filled in automatically by Visual Studio when I created the project. The assembly product is called Hello World, copyright with the name and the current year, and so forth. You can include trademark, culture information, and there's a lot of comments and so forth. And you can even do versioning kind of steps. So in a beta version, this is probably going to be something like 0.1.00 or whatever. Okay, so these are the metadata attributes that are going to be included on the assembly that the CLR can read, and at some effect just the identity of the assembly, and others are just information about it, such as the copyright. Now, it's not necessary to put the assembly metadata in a central location like this, but doing so makes it easy to maintain the information. And using Visual Studio to configure assembly metadata updates only this file. So there's various property settings that you can set in different places within Visual Studio for this project that'll affect what's in this file as well. Okay, I'll close that and come back over to Solution Explorer. The next section here is the References section. And I'll go ahead and expand that. And you can see that we already have several references. These are all references that were predefined when I created this project. So Visual Studio did all this work for me. Okay, so these are references to .NET assemblies that are available to the application. And so these are the default for the console application, but the application really only uses a couple of these. Most notably, Microsoft.C# and System. Now, I may use analyzers if I use some of the advanced debugging tools within Visual Studio, but really only uses these two namespaces. These others are included because, again, Microsoft is assuming that you're going to write real-world applications, and so console applications often need to use system.data and dataset extensions in order to get access to different kinds of data. It's going to use different network protocols, in this case HTTP, and it's going to work with XML and use LINQ, which is essentially a querying tool for XML and other collections of data. But this application doesn't use them, so I really don't need those. So what these references do is they tell the C# compiler at design time and the CLR at runtime where to find code referenced in the application. So for example, the console object used in the main method is in the system namespace, so there has to be a reference to system. And that's one of the namespaces that's actually used here. If you need to use other parts of the .NET framework, third-party libraries, or your own custom libraries that aren't in this project, then you'll need to add a reference here in the References section. Okay, now these reference settings are stored in the helloworld.csproj, CSPROJ. That's the C# project file. This file isn't listed in Solution Explorer, but is behind many of the elements that are shown within in Solution Explorer. You can open that XML file in a text editor, including Visual Studio, but not if you have the project open already, in order to examine its contents. And that's interesting to do, but I'm not going to do that here. Okay, then the next thing here is the app.config file. And notice when I select that, when I select any file here, it will display within the designer window, but on the right side here. So I haven't actually opened this file, but because I've selected it here, Visual Studio assumes that I'm interested in seeing what's in it, and so it opens up essentially a virtual copy of it. But if I wanted to actually make changes, I could double click on it, and that opens it up here within the designer, and now I can make changes. So this is an application configuration file in XML format. Here's where you can include many kinds of application configuration data that the C# compiler and the CLR use to build and execute the program. The only thing you'll find here for Hello World is an element that specifies that the program is designed to run with version 4.6 of the .NET framework. And that, as I speak, is the latest version of the framework. ASP.NET 5, released in early 2016, breaks with this .config file scheme. Earlier versions of ASP.NET used a web.config file, but in order to implement new features and to support deployment to Linux and Mac OS X, ASP.NET 5 uses a JSON, which is a JavaScript object notation format files for much of its configuration information. Okay, so again, that was to support some cross-platform features. All right, I'll close that. And then the last item here, of course, is program.cs, which I already have open. So the Hello World project consists of a single code file. That's not strictly true, but this just has assembly attributes. So this is the only place where there's code. Complex applications can have hundreds of code files, and they can be organized into a hierarchy of folders. Okay, so I've already taken an extensive look at this code file as we've explored the structure of a C# application. But what's interesting here is that if you expand this node in Solution Explorer all the way down, you can explore the hierarchy of objects in each physical code file. So here you can see that it contains a single class called program, which has a single method main, as well as see the signature of this method, which means the parameters that it takes, in this case an array of strings, and the return types, in this case void. All right, and if you double click on any element here, then Visual Studio will open up that file if it's not already open, and take you directly to that element within the file. So this is a very handy way to quickly jump to different parts of complex code files. If you have a long code file, thousands and thousands of lines of code, but maybe it defines only a few methods, then it can be a lot easier just to come to Solution Explorer and navigate to the method that you want by double-clicking on it. All right, now, another important thing is that you need to understand that the project structure that I've explored here for this console application has elements you'll find in many .NET project types. But you'll find a lot of variation as well, since the structure of a project has to support the unique characteristics of the various kinds of executable code that can run in Windows and other platforms. At an extreme, ASP.NET applications have unique needs as a server application and therefore a unique project structure. By understanding these common elements, though, you'll have an easier time understanding the unique structures of those other project types.